All right, so today we're going to start by looking at some basic foundational reading skills. Today's lesson deals specifically with supporting details and how we use those to make inferences and draw conclusions. So the goals for this lesson are to use details and examples in literary and informational texts to demonstrate understanding and make inferences. We're also going to learn how to use details as evidence to analyze literary and informational texts. And then finally use details to support inferences and conclusions from the text. So for the next few minutes, we're going to spend some time kind of defining these terms and explaining what they mean when we talk about things like inferences and conclusions and analysis and interpretation. So let's start with the details. Whenever we are reading a passage to identify details, our goal is to read for information. For example, let's say that you are looking at a training manual for a new piece of heavy equipment. All right, you need to learn how to operate that particular piece of equipment. Naturally, what we want to do is just jump right in the driver's seat, start playing around with the gears. Is that a good idea?
No,
Why not?
because everything's different from machine to machine.
Yeah.
Gears different, everything's different.
Right. So you may be used to the lever on this particular piece of equipment doing one thing, and then when you get into the new piece of equipment, same type of lever might do something else. It might do something
They
that could
switch a lot.
potentially hurt you. So what do?
You read the manual.
Yeah, read the manual, read the instructions. So, typically most of the reading that you are going to do on the job, and even most of the reading that you are going to do just as part of everyday life, is reading for information. When you're reading for information, you're looking for specific details that help explain those things. So details are important pieces of information that are used to identify and support claims and ideas in a text. These details are what actually gives the text meaning. It is the foundation of reading comprehension. Typically, you know that it's a detail when it answers questions such as who, what, when, where, and why. So as we focus on the details, now that we know kind of what details are, why do you think that accuracy is important when it comes to identifying details? Yes?
Is it to get straight to a point instead of trying to add things to make it confusing?
Yes, you definitely want to get straight to the point. Absolutely. So we want to make sure that those details are accurate. Why else is accuracy important when it comes to identifying details?
Probably specific words or problems that's in
Make
a
sure they're-
story or a line.
Make sure they're factual.
Yes. So you look for specific words that you want to make sure are factual. Absolutely. Ultimately, what we want to do, the reason why accuracy is so important is we want to make sure that we are getting the right information. So it is critical that when we are reading for information, when we're reading a text, that we are looking for specific information and that we are finding the right information. So there are a couple of points that we do need to consider. First, skimming is easy, but details can be missed. How many times have you went to read an article online, or maybe even when you were back in school, you were reading to answer a particular question on a test or an assignment? How many times did you just like quickly go through the text and look for it?
I did that.
So obviously when we are skimming through a text, we're just quickly reading through it because we're not actually reading the we're not actually reading the text, we're just looking for particular details. You know, again, best example, sitting in class, taking an exam, you're asked to answer a particular question. So you read through the text quickly, looking for the information you need to answer that question. That is skimming. Skimming is easy to do. Skimming does work, but sometimes if we're not careful, we can miss details. So when we are reading for detail gathering and comprehension, rereading is going to be an essential skill. Basically what that means is sometimes you may have to read that section of text 2, 3, maybe even 4 times to ensure that you get all of the details. Now, how many of you feel like, well, if I have to reread something 2 or 3 times, I must not be a very good reader? I know for me, I felt for the longest time, if I had to reread something, if I missed it, I was like, oh, well, I missed it. I'm not going back and rereading. Because, you know, I'm a good reader. If I miss something, oh, well, no big deal. But the reality is, having to go back and reread has nothing to do with your reading level or your reading ability. It is just simply being a good, what I like to call reading detective. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with going back and reading that passage, or its section of a passage even, 2, 3, maybe even 4 times to ensure that you understand what the text is saying and that you have all of the information that you need. So if you do have to go back and look at that passage again a couple of times, it has nothing to do with being a good reader or a bad reader. Good readers will reread to ensure that they have all of the information that they need in order to identify those details and use them for a particular purpose. So we've talked quite a bit about details, and details are important. But one thing we need to take into consideration is the type of text is going to determine the type of details that we need to be looking for. So when we are reading a particular text, we are looking for what are known as explicit details. Can anyone tell me what explicit details are?
It's like details that are right there in the passage.
Yes, they are taken directly from the passage. So explicit details are stated right there in the passage. It's information that we pull directly from it. What the information that the author provided. Now, sometimes we may you may hear the term implicit. Oh, it'll help if I get the right pen. Implicit details. So if explicit details are taken directly from that passage of text, what are implicit details? Okay, explicit details are, as you pointed out, they're stated directly in the passage. It's information that we pull right from the text. But what is an implicit? I-M-P-L-I-C-I-T detail.
So, we already explained explicit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we're thinking implicit.
Yes.
So wouldn't it just be the opposite?
Wouldn't it be like if you read something and then even though there's not no details, you can pretty much figure out what it's about through reading it?
You're exactly right. It is the opposite. Explicit means we are taking it from the text. Implicit means that it is implied. The writer does not actually provide the detail, but based on the information from the passage, as Sam was saying, you can kind of figure it out. So those particular details, even though they are not stated, you as the reader are able to make assumptions about what the text is saying. The author may tell us something without actually directly telling us in the passage. That's what we mean by implicit details. So over the course of the day, and really what we're going to be covering the rest of this week, is we will have opportunities to practice identifying both explicit and using explicit details to help us determine things that the author is implying. Identify those implicit details. So as I said, as we go on this week, we'll learn a little bit more about how to do that. At least for the purpose of TAID testing, and really in general, there are two types of text that you will work with. One is called informational text, the other is called literary texts. So who can tell me what an informational text is?
Informational text?
Mm-hmm.
It's where it's like, you read it and it's nothing but information about some type of subject or something.
Yeah. Nail on the head. Informational texts serve the purpose to inform about a topic or subject. So what are some examples of informational text that you can think of?
History books.
Yeah, history books are a great example. Really, any textbook for that matter. What type of informational text would you encounter in your trades?
Instructional,
Yeah, instruction manuals,
operation manuals.
operation manuals, yeah. Training manuals,
How-to guides.
exactly. So all of these serve the purpose of providing you with information that you need about a topic. So the other form of text that we typically work with is what is known as a literary text. So what kind of books will be an example of a literary text?
A fictional?
Yes. So typically
Okay.
literary texts are going to be fictional.
So is fictional the one that's made up?
Yes.
Okay, so I read fictional books.
Okay. All right. So fiction stories. Any type of novel, short story,
Harry Potter.
Poetry, yeah, Harry Potter is a great example. That's a literary text.
I love Harry Potter.
Yes.
Poetry, these are all examples of literary text. So whenever you think of literary text, just think of fictional writing. So typically your informational texts, like I said, are designed to inform. They provide information about a topic of interest or maybe a topic of concern. Literary texts typically serve the purpose to entertain or maybe make a statement about something or possibly even teach a lesson, but don't view those three reasons as being exhaustive, but that's describing all literary texts. These are just three examples of the purpose that they would serve. So now let's think about some of the details that we would find in informational texts.
Dates,
Yeah, so dates of events,
names of people,
names of people,
if it's like something like resources, if you have to like quote where you got whatever from.
mm-hmm. Yeah. With an informational text, dates, names, these all describe what Mr. Burns pointed out a few minutes ago. Factual information. Just the facts. Statistics and examples are also details that we will find in an informational text. Now, what about in fictional writing? What are some details that we would potentially look for in a literary text? Most common ones that we are going to look for are our elements of character, so a good example of this is, you each mentioned that you enjoy Harry Potter. What can you tell me about Harry Potter as a person?
Oh, something supernatural. Pretty much.
Okay, yeah, he is supernatural, so that will be an element of his character.
He's king. He's very loyal to his friends
He
and to
gets
his
the power
house.
of evil inside of him.
What's that?
He gets the power of evil inside of him, but chooses to use it as good.
Okay, so we're getting a little bit deeper into some of his character traits.
I forgot about that one.
Does his physical description also describe some elements of his character?
It
Yes.
can.
Okay, so what can you tell me about Harry Potter physically?
He's small and lanky.
Small and lanky?
Has glasses.
Okay.
Black hair.
Yeah. Wears glasses, brown hair,
His
and
house couldn't like the house he's part of be.
don't forget that, his little lightning scar. So physical characteristics, they're the way that they interact with others, how they feel. These are all elements of character. Some other details that we would look for in a literary text could be plot elements. So what is the story about? How does the author describe the way that the events unfold? What are the characters doing and why are they doing it? This deals specifically with plot. And then the third most common detail that we would look for are the details about the setting, where the story takes place, where the particular events or action are taking place at that point in time. So depending on the type of text that you are using is going to determine what types of details that you need to look for. We can take these details and use them to make an inference. Who can tell me what an inference is?
It's like a guess.
You got it. Here,
So,
good job. Yes, an inference is a guess, but more specifically,
How?
it is an educated guess. So whenever we say that we are making an inference, we are making an educated guess about a point or idea. Now, who makes the inference?
who makes it? We do.
Yeah, you as the reader are the one making the inference. It's not the author, it is the reader.
So don't you like make the educated guess or the inference and then you figure out and then you actually go back and you read it and you point out the details to figure out if that was right or not?
Yep, that's exactly how you do it. So an inference is completely assumed by the reader. So as you recall earlier talking about details, we talked about the difference between explicit and implicit details. Explicit details are what we take from the text in order to make an inference. That inference is what is actually implied. Okay, so we have to make sure that we have good details to support this idea that we have. Now, whether you realize it or not, you actually make inferences all the time. So if we see somebody in a suit and tie, let's just say in Johnson City. We're out in Johnson City, Tennessee. We see a gentleman walking down the road wearing a suit and tie carrying a briefcase. It's like, okay, he is a businessman.
Yeah.
Probably on his way to work.
Or maybe he could also be on his lunch break down and he's going. You never know. It depends on the time of day though too. because-
Exactly. So here we're already starting to make more inferences as we consider other details, as we consider other elements. All right, so our next term to consider is interpretation. Interpretation is the method that we use to explain how we make sense of something. So the simple definition is interpretation is how we make sense of the information we get in the details. So whenever you were asked to interpret something, it is when you read it, how do you understand it? How do you make sense of it? When it comes to interpretation, like inferences, we need to have support from the text. So in order to interpret something, in order to make sense of it, we have to have details that support it. So what that requires you to do is to gather evidence based on the details within the text. And ultimately, when you do that, when you're gathering details to support your interpretation, it's the same steps that you take in order to make an argument about something. And we'll touch on that here in just a moment. So any information that is explicitly stated in the text, if it is right there in the passage, this provides good evidence for interpretation. Also, Also, your interpretation helps you to draw conclusions about the text. So you take the information that is given to you, and you are able to piece those together to make an argument and come to your own conclusion about what the author wants you to know about that text, or what they want you to learn from it. The last term that we need to discuss is analysis. So who can tell me what it means to analyze something?
Break down,
To look into it.
break down the text.
Yeah, break it down, look into it. Both of you are exactly right. When we analyze something, we are breaking it down into its component parts. So we take it down, we break it into its individual parts, and then we look to see how they work independently and how their independent work affects each other. So how do these parts come together to make it work? When you are taking the information that is presented to you from the text, we're looking at all of those little details and seeing how they fit together. How do they work to present us with the information that we have? So it's no different really than taking a car engine apart. But hopefully when we are done and we see how the individual details work together to present an idea, hopefully the idea will actually work, like as long as we put the engine back together the way that we should, hopefully the